primary research methodology. As we've already seen, there are 5 different sections of a research methodology: the choice of design, the construction of method, the sampling, the procedure and the analysis. And so far we've looked at choice of research design. I want to focus now on the remaining sections. Depending on which choice you've made in the research design, if you've chosen, for example, an experiment, there are a number of areas you should consider. And if you look at the slide below experiment, but in the second row, construction of method, there are mention of variables, hypothesis, measurement and design. So if you're doing an experiment, you need to be clear what all of these are for your experiment. If you're doing a questionnaire, the sort of questions you need to answer in this section are written below questionnaire. So you need to decide how you're going to distribute your questionnaire, what type of questions to ask, what you're measuring, and you also need to make sure you do a pilot study. If you're doing an observation as your research method, then you need to decide what you're going to record or observe and how you're going to record it. If you're doing an interview, similarly, below interview it asks questions like the type of interview and the questions that you need to ask. So you need to think about these. And if you're doing a focus group, you need to decide how you're going to interact, how you're going to run it, and what questions you need to cover. Whichever of these you have decided to use, you also need to consider the theoretical underpinning. What theories or models or frameworks from your literature review are you going to use to design your questions or your experiment? You need to explain this. You also need to consider whether, if it was repeated again, the method you've chosen would get the same results. This is the reliability. And then finally in this section you need to consider the validity. Is your tool that you're using, your questionnaire or your focus group, is it getting what you really want to know? So are you actually getting information that's directly relevant to what your questions are intended to ask? And all of that goes in the construction of the method. In the next section, sampling, there are a number of ways that you could sample your population. The population is everybody that you're researching. If it's a very large population, you're not going to be able to contact everybody, so you will use a sample from the population. You have to decide how big your sample should be, and some of the later slides show that information, guidance on how to do this. And also you have to be clear how you're going to select your sample. If you're asked about the sampling frame or the sample frame, that really refers to a list of everybody in your population, which you may or may not have. The procedure is where you explain all of the steps that you've gone through in order to get the research data. The more detail you give here, the easier it would be for someone to replicate it. And then finally, in the analysis section, this is where you plan how you will analyse your data. And this is really important, because if you gather the data and then think about how to analyse it, it's quite likely that you won't have gathered it in a format that you need. So before you actually use your questionnaire or your focus group, you need to think about what format you want the responses in and how you're going to analyse it, whether that's going to be using percentages or some other statistical test if you're doing quantitative research, or whether that's content analysis, looking for the themes that the interview or focus group has covered, if you're doing qualitative analysis. So this is a quick overview of the research methodology for primary research. You also, within here, need to consider ethics. You need to make sure that you're treating people fairly. Please look at the slideshow and the websites in module resources for much more detail about primary research methodology.